as you breathe in, you may count your breathing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Slow and gentle breathing. And out breath, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Whenever there is a thought, you may just recognize, okay, this is auto thought, automatic thought. Let it go and then go back to breathing. Okay, you can start. Today, I'd like to catch up with you on stress management, the importance of stress management, and how important is it neurologically. If we can manage our stress, then the old brain, the amygdala, will be more active. That will be triggering our fear responses, and with that our mind will no longer be creative and calm. So it's important that we learn how to keep calm, how to manage our stress, like this. So I like to show you I like to show you 2 or 3 video clips. The first one is about mindfulness as the foundation for happiness. Somebody from Yale University, Dr. Heidi Kolber, she presented at the World Economic Forum. That was just 6 minutes. Is it possible to dim the light here or the dear million can I pay Piluyana? The share. At that right.
One of the things that seems to stand in our way of being happy is that shit happens. And this is actually the common denominator for all human experience. The fact is that even if we are the luckiest, most effective people on the planet, life sometimes deviates from our plan. And it's just like the Rolling Stones said, you can't always get what you want. And that can be quite stressful. But of course, you all know that shit happens. What is less well known is that we also all have the power to change our experience of this shit, to train and learn how to through really anything that might happen to us. Today I'm going to show you evidence that this kind of training can not only make you feel better, it can also change the way that your brain works. And the key practice I'm going to talk about is a practice of mindfulness. Now, mindfulness is rooted in ancient Buddhist traditions that are aimed at the cessation of suffering. It's actually part of a system of practices that include things like loving kindness, generosity, and compassion, and it's cultivated through the practice of mindfulness meditation. In a secular context, mindfulness has actually been studied for over 30 years, and many scientists, including me, think about it as a two-component process, where the first component is attention that is oriented to this present moment, to whatever is happening to you, so you can engage with your life. The second component is attitude, and it's attitude that's open, it's curious, and it's accepting of this moment exactly as it is. And one classic instruction is to pay attention on purpose and without judgment. Or in the words of the Beatles, you just let it be. Now, why might training like this be useful? Well, one reason is because most of us are incredibly distracted pretty much all the time, and we miss a lot of what's happening to us. One study showed that our minds are actually wandering almost 50% of the time, and during every single activity, even during sex. And what's worse is that mind wandering is actually related to being unhappy. And that suggests that being mindful in itself might make you happier. And it leaves you a lot more time and energy to act wisely and make good decisions. That means that being mindful allows you to respond to the world rather than react to it. And how does mindfulness do that? Well, one way it does it is by altering the brain's defaults. That is a default mode network, and you can think of it as our autopilot. It is a network of regions that's more active when our mind is spontaneously wandering and less active when we're focused on a task. And to test whether mindfulness meditation altered these defaults, we recruited experienced mindfulness meditators, not Buddhist monks, but healthy Western adults who just happened to meditate for many years, kind of like me. And we then scanned their brains using fMRI and compared their brain activity to the brain activity of well-matched control who've never meditated. What we found is that experienced meditators actually report a significant lower amount of mind wandering and less activity and connectivity in their default mode network. Does it mean that you all need to practice many, many years to change your defaults? Apparently not. Much less training already starts changing your defaults. In one study, stretch adults were recruited and randomized into one of two conditions. They either did intensive mindfulness training for 3 days or 3 days of a controlled training. The results showed that even after 3 days of intensive mindfulness training, there were already some similar changes to the default mode network that were similar to what we saw with the experienced meditators. In addition, those who meditated also showed a reduction in an inflammation marker that is related to disease risk. In comparison, those who did the control training actually showed an increase in this inflammation marker. In addition, the default mode network actually was responsible for some of the reduction in inflammation. This suggests that mindfulness training changes your brain, it changes your emotional experience, and it changes your body in a way that makes you more resilient to stress and disease. And there's even more good news here. You might start noticing some of the benefits of mindfulness meditation as soon as the first time that you try. We tested this in a few recent studies. We recruited individuals who've never meditated, and we randomized them to either meditate for 10 minutes for the first time or do a control activity for 10 minutes. We then tested their performance on a task that required both accuracy and speed. What we found is that those individuals who meditated for the first time, overall, were faster or more accurate than those who didn't meditate. And we also saw changes in brain activity that suggested that their brains are more attuned to the task, allowing them to perform better. What this means is that in the time that it might take you to just briefly check your email, you might try to meditate for 10 minutes and you might have an improvement in your cognitive performance. So in conclusion, I invite you to ask yourself, do I want to be more focused? Do I want to be more present? Do I want to have more time and energy to act wisely and make good decisions? If you answered yes to any of these questions, you might want to try mindfulness meditation. Now, mindfulness is not for everyone and it's not a panacea, But we know that it can fundamentally alter your brain's defaults. We know that it can reduce your stress and make you more focused. And importantly, it can allow you to live in this moment, accepting it exactly as it is, maybe even loving it exactly as it is, even if shit happens. Thank you very much.
You can see in 6 minutes the presentation and how important is it to actually manage your own stress. If you entertain stress, if you don't do anything about it, it's going to change your brain. It's going to increase more neural connection in the amygdala region, which is fear associated. And not only that, it's going to reduce all the neural connection in the hippocampus area, which is executive brain. You can see that at the top level, all the CEOs and scientists, they have warmed to this practice, and we call it as a secular mindfulness. Secular mindfulness because it doesn't require any belief. With this, I'd like to encourage you to meditate every day. Every day in the morning, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, and then in the evening, maybe after lunch, 2 or 3 minutes. That will make your work more efficient, and your brain will function in a more efficient way. Of course, earlier the video clip tells us that we have 3 kinds of benefit. One is emotional. There's healthy emotion. The second one is the body, which is producing more healthy hormones like oxytocin and like that, and less cortisol hormone. And of course, the last one is a healthier brain. Healthier brain. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to compassion. I want you to think about how compassion might be practically adopted, in your life. Compassion is basically about working with problem. It's about using problem as motivation. This is what I told Wendy, actually, when you came to our meditation center. Instead of competing with other students, if you are a medical student, if you just think about problem faced by patients. If you're interested in cardiology, think about how people suffer from cardiology. Simply because they don't know how to prevent it, or simply because they are not aware of unhealthy lifestyle, or maybe they are not aware of the environmental factors causing cardiological problems. If you're going to be an engineer, think about certain problem that your profession can solve. So you think about problem and trying to work on problem. In that way, you can become the best student in your subject without necessarily competing with others. by competing with others, you actually increase unnecessary stress on yourself. And when you compete with other people, which people encourage you to do, you start looking at your competitor as a threat. So your mind is going to be working on the basis of threat focus, not on so-called affiliative focus, which is in a connection with the subject that you do. So that's one thing. And at later point, when we have discussion, I want you to look at what practically what you are studying is going to solve. What kind of problem to start thinking about problem. If it's economics, if it's business study, and then try to find out problem specifically in this country, or maybe what you can foresee in what you're going to do, and how your knowledge, your training is going to help solve those problems. But first, I'm going to show you a video clip from a medic, Hydra, 40 seconds. The melee is a problem of burnout and the benefit of compassion. So we can have a look at this one.
In my job, I meet people on the worst day of their life. I'm an intensivist, a physician who specializes in intensive care medicine. If you become my patient, it's because you need life-sustaining therapies in the ICU. Lately, I've been rethinking how I care for people. Let me tell you why. On February 27, 2007, on a snowy stretch of highway outside of Uppsala, Sweden, 2 buses collided head-on. This is what was left of one of the buses. 6 people died, but miraculously, 56 people were saved. 5 years later, researchers asked the question, what do survivors remember? They interviewed every survivor, and using a rigorous qualitative research methodology, they found 2 common themes in the data. The first was expected, the physical pain that they felt at the moment of impact. But the other theme? A lack of compassion from the caregivers at all the hospitals. That's what they remembered 5 years later. These data have begun to open my eyes to a stark reality. In healthcare, we are in the midst of a compassion crisis. Scientists define compassion as an emotional response to another's pain or suffering involving an authentic desire to help. It's different from sympathy or empathy, which are the feeling and understanding components, in that compassion also involves taking action. So here are the data. Research from Harvard University found that nearly 50% of Americans believe that our healthcare system and our providers are not compassionate. 2/3 of patients have had a meaningful healthcare experience with a lack of compassion. Rigorous research show that 70% of opportunities for compassion are missed by physicians, and compassion comprises less than 1% of all communications by physicians to patients. These data are compounded by an epidemic of burnout in healthcare providers. Burnout is characterized by depersonalization, which is an inability to make a personal connection. And in the era of electronic medical records, rigorous research shows that healthcare providers spend more time looking into computer screens than looking patients in the eyes. Based on all of these data, I conclude we have a compassion crisis indeed. But here's the big question. Does it matter? Does compassion really matter? Now you may say, of course compassion matters. We have a moral imperative. It's part of the art of medicine. And of course I agree. But is compassion just in the art of medicine? Or are there also evidence-based effects belonging in the science of medicine? And what is the evidence? In addition to being an intensivist, I'm also a physician scientist. In other words, I'm a research nerd. I like data, and my hypothesis was that compassion matters for patients, for patient care, and for those who care for patients. So I went to the biomedical literature, and I used a methodology called systematic review. So over 2 years through the National Library of Medicine, I reviewed more than 1,000 scientific abstracts, more than 200 research studies in total. And today I share with you what I found. The effects of compassion on patients, on patient care, and specifically the cost of care, and on those who care for patients, our healthcare providers. There are more than 20 distinct mechanisms of action by which compassion can have beneficial effects on patients. Let's go to the data. Let's start with the practical. If you have compassion for patients, you may be more likely to be meticulous about their care, or have higher quality standards, and lower likelihood of making a major medical error. But there are also physiological effects. Compassion can buffer stress-mediated disease. Compassion can also modulate a patient's experience of pain. There are neuroendocrine effects. So in patients with diabetes, research shows that high physician compassion is associated with an 80% higher odds of optimal blood sugar control and 40% lower odds of acute metabolic complications. There are also immune system effects. So in a University of Wisconsin study in patients with a common cold, high physician compassion, as rated by patients, was associated with enhanced immune response, shorter duration of symptoms, and lower severity of symptoms. And importantly, compassion can impact patient self-care. If you care deeply about patients, and they know that, they may be more likely to take their medicine. In a Johns Hopkins study of 1,700 patients with HIV, researchers asked patients, does your physician know you as a person? Knowing the patient as a person was associated with 33% higher odds of adherence to therapy and 20% higher odds of having no detectable virus in the blood. Compassion has also been associated with lower healthcare costs, which are a major factor in the health of our economy. In primary care, for example, research from the University of Rochester and UC Davis have shown that compassionate, patient-centered care is associated with lower discretionary resource utilization. So fewer diagnostic tests, fewer referrals to specialists, fewer unnecessary hospitalizations, and lower total healthcare charges. So here's the bottom line. If healthcare providers actually spend more time talking to patients, maybe we don't need so many tests and referrals. But what about time? We've all heard the expression, time is money, but time is also a vital factor in the efficiency and the economics of healthcare. So here's a staggering number, 56. Research from Harvard University shows that 56% of physicians believe they do not have time for compassion. This is in the context of a classic study from Princeton University on helping behaviors, which found that it wasn't the intrinsic belief of the importance of helping by the potential helper. It was whether or not the potential helper believed they had enough time to help. So how long does it actually take for a meaningful expression of compassion? To address this, researchers from Johns Hopkins University did a randomized controlled trial in patients with cancer who were having a consultation with the oncologist. And in this randomized trial, the primary outcome measure was anxiety. And if you have cancer, it's a pretty important outcome measure. So they found that patients randomized to a compassion intervention from the oncologist had less anxiety than usual care. So what was the compassion intervention? I could describe it for you, but instead I'm just going to read it to you. From the oncologist at the beginning of the consultation. I know this is a tough experience to go through, and I want you to know that I am here with you. Some of the things that I say to you today may be difficult to understand, so I want you to feel comfortable in stopping me if something I say is confusing or doesn't make sense. We are here together, and we will go through this together. And at the end of the consultation, the oncologist said, I know this is a tough time for you, and I want to emphasize again that we are in this together. I will be with you each step along the way. So how long did that take? They timed it 40 seconds. So this randomized trial shows that all you need is 40 seconds of compassion to make a meaningful difference. Importantly, 40 seconds of compassion can be a powerful therapy for the giver too. And this is important because these data are not just applicable to healthcare workers, but to everyone here today. Science shows that compassion for others can have a direct, positive effect on your own well-being. Neuroscience studies show that compassion for others can trigger reward pathways in the brain and positive emotion that can buffer or even counteract the activation of stress pathways and negative emotion. So, in effect, compassion for others can make you forget your own worries, at least temporarily. So now this is where the science meets the personal. A couple of years ago, after nearly 20 years of working in the ICU and meeting people on the worst day of their life, I came to a stark realization. I had almost every symptom of burnout. And let me assure you, that's not a good place to be. It can be a dark place. Currently, the recommended prescription for burnout is what I call escapism. Get away, detach, pull back, go on some nature hikes or whatever. But I was not buying it because I believed that the antidote to burnout had to be at the point of care. In personal connection, human connection, not in escape. So what was I supposed to do? Well, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I took the research nerd approach. And armed with the data that 40 seconds of compassion can be a powerful therapy for the giver too, I decided to do an experiment on myself. I was the only research subject in this experiment. I was the N of one. So I tested the hypothesis that my 40 seconds of compassion would transform my experience. I connected more, not less. Cared more, not less. Leaned in rather than pulling back. And that is when the fog of burnout began to lift. My 40 seconds of compassion changed everything for me. Now you might be thinking, I'm speaking on the power of compassion. I must be the most compassionate doctor. But the truth, if I'm being honest, is that I'm still a work in progress. I'm working hard at compassion every day, but I see it now. And thankfully, science shows that change can happen. I used to think that people were either wired for compassion or they were not. But the preponderance of evidence in the scientific literature, both in healthcare workers and the general population, shows quite clearly that compassionate behaviors can, in fact, be learned. And that is good news indeed. So now it's time to answer the big question that I posed to you at the beginning. Does compassion matter? My systematic review of the literature now complete. 1,000 scientific abstracts, 200 research manuscripts, and one life-changing N of 1 experiment behind me. I now conclude with confidence. Compassion matters. For patients, for patient care, and for those who care for patients. Compassionate care belongs in the domain of evidence-based medicine. I no longer believe in this paradigm behind me, this historical paradigm. I now believe in this one. Because I found that there is science in the art of medicine. And the science is strong. I like to call this field compassionomics. It's the convergence of the science and the art of medicine. I will close just by acknowledging that you don't have to be a healthcare worker to feel burned out. And if you do, I suggest that you test the compassion hypothesis for yourself. Do your N of 1 experiment. Look and see those around you in need of compassion and give them your 40 seconds of compassion. See how it transforms your experience. But don't do it because I say so. Do it because science says so. 40 seconds of compassion can change everything for a patient. It changed everything for me. It can change everything for you too. And that is the power of 40 seconds. Thank you.
These are some of the latest research findings. I have chosen this theme because we are fortunate enough to be in touch with development in the Western world, and we are also culturally rooted here in this country, where we have a lot of teaching on mindfulness, meditation, on compassion. Like this book is from UCLA medical school. This professor, he started when he was a medical student, and his teacher was a Buddhist monk resident in the USA, and he has been successful to the extent that he can use mindfulness meditation to change behavior therapy, which is a huge one in clinical psychology. It's something like this. If anyone from this country can have access to these latest research findings and can be part of this, is you and me. So we have to be motivated enough to be aware of it, to bring compassion into this. Then we need to think about a problem that our country faces, and try to connect this with what we are doing. So may I know how many kind of so the different subject you are doing? Economics, how many? Economics, okay. And medicine, business studies, and IT, and what else? What do you do?
I study psychology.
Psychology, very good. Psychology, how many psychology? One and one. And you? Business. Biology. Okay, how many biology? Is it biology or biomedical? Biology. Is it biology or biomedical? Biology. Okay, biology. And business. Okay, business. You do business study, economics. Not yet. psychology, economics, agent business. Okay. What about you? You're not at uni. Not yet. Which grade you are? 10, and you? Not yet. Okay. Which grade? 11. Business and taxation. Okay. Right? Economics and IR. Okay, 12th grade. You haven't decided yet. Computer engineering, IT. What about you? Economics, business. Undecided. Linguistics and business is interesting. Languages. Modern languages. Language. What language you have to do? Japanese. In Oxford, when we say modern languages, we are talking about like German, Spanish, and French, like this. If you talk about ancient languages, we talk about classic. That would be Greek and Latin, and then we talk about Asian and American languages like that. Yeah? Physics, engineering. What? Civil engineering. Yeah. So I'm going to hand out some books later, but for now, I don't know how can we do it? Can we group people by subject or not? It doesn't matter. You just sit where you are and you start talking to each other. What I want you to try to exercise is that to think about problem that your study might help. So okay. So this is important to use it as your motivation, because this is going to be a buffer zone between stress and your work. It will help you to reduce your stress. Not only that, it will motivate. It keeps your brain healthier this way. I don't want the group to be too big. Shall we say 3 people is okay? 3 people is okay. We have about 15 minutes, and you are 7, maybe too many of you. Maybe you can form a small group this side, one group. Maybe 4 of you is okay. What about you? Go 3 and 4. Okay, if you can. What about here? 3 and 4 as well, and this side 3. Okay, we can start now. 15 minutes. Wendy, can you keep the time? Say in 10 minutes, you can tell them, okay, 5 minutes, 5 more minutes. It's okay if you move in this side so that you have more space. Just one person moving here. And maybe you move out a little bit so that we can have face-to-face conversation. Can 3 of you, can you move out this way? Yeah. Is it to do face-to-face? It's good better, yes. Where are you? This way? Okay. Then, okay. What about you moving this side? It's close.
in that kind of system, that's quite interesting. One of my friends also studied food science, and it's actually quite the kind of field, like all the other like biology studies, psychology studies, and like animal studies as well. This is one of them. The quality of food and anything related to hygiene and stuff. Let's just say mental health. My focus, my emphasis is on the question. Just general, but it's broader people. I think this generation faces a lot of depression, more than last generation. So when I'm like trying to study away from emotions, especially in people that mental health knowledge. So I'm actually focusing on send a message that mental health has people actually I've seen people discuss say some weird things when I say one of them study psychology that much. I can't understand. So my focus is on promoting knowledge and awareness. There are some Burmese words that I couldn't find when I tried to translate from English to Burmese. It doesn't really, it's not accurate. That translates. Psychology is still very young. It's not existed years ago. So yeah, you guys should. I think you guys will follow Facebook. You guys face it's an everyday thing. That's what we're doing. How to learn language. I need to have you ever heard of any mental health services here?
later, if each group can share their discussion with the whole group, that would be good. So if you can take some notes and discuss how to present it. Okay, 5 more minutes. Is the time now? Okay, 2 minutes left. I think we can start sharing now. These exercises to prepare you, to face problems. And usually when people face problems, they panic, they get stressed out, and some people, in psychological terms, they get frozen. That's called fight, flight, and freeze. By thinking about more and more problems and motivating ourselves, how we can help, we can reduce those problems. We are actually following the Buddhist way of approaching life. This is problem-based approach. So which group is ready to present? Any of you? You're fine. Okay. Good. If you can introduce your group.
Hi, my name is, just say your names first.
Okay.
My name is Apollo.
Yeah.
I study psychology. And this is Jasmine. She's business management. And she's Melissa.
Okay.
And she's into microbiology, actually.
Okay.
And Jasmine talked the problem that Jasmine faced in her field of studies is related to sustainability with relating to agricultural field. I think that. Do you want to say anything about that?
Sure. I just said that businesses can control the amount of resources the world uses, and they can have more sustainable business plans so that the resources that we have don't go to so that we don't run out.
Very good. Yeah.
Okay. For me, the problem that psychology faces, especially in Myanmar, is the lack of mental health awareness here, especially here, and conflict that, religion and psychology has it here. It's a bit intertwined, so it's hard to tell them apart for the general public. So that's a problem, of course, and the solution is to promote mental health awareness in as simple as
In which way you say is intertwined?
Intertwined as in the traditional beliefs and it's complicated. I don't know how to say.
It's okay. Just express it. It's okay. There's no right and wrong.
It's just hard to tackling the traditional beliefs, and most people don't believe that don't believe about mental health here. So yeah, it's a traditional, the traditional ways they don't believe it. That's what I want to fix it. And yeah, that's a problem here.
Thank you.
My field of focus is microbiology, and I believe that the problems that this field faces is the field is very diverse, but it has direct influence in the kind of medicine as well, because of these pharmaceuticals and the tackling problems like the rising resistance to antibiotics, and also there's industrial as well because of things such as food quality assurance and all sorts of other industrial related packaging managements and such. So yeah.
Thank you. Okay, in the first group.
Hi, I'm Grace, this is KZ, and this is Wendy, and we both study business, and Wendy studies medicine. So we talked about business ethics, and we learned when should you be socially responsible, or when you should think about your financial needs. So like I think one of the solutions is to like lead by example too, because it's a personal choice to choose to be socially responsible or choose to think about your company. So because when you think about like the long-term and short-term progress for your society, you would typically choose to be more socially responsible. So I think compassion is a term that you can utilize in business as well.
Without imagine a company with an outreach, but that company is very responsible in its operation towards its staff, towards the environment, and is directing is goal in this sustainability. That kind of if we try to help solve the country's problem, and just by doing our business properly, I would consider it to be a very compassionate business, and not only for people who go out and do a lot of charity. Of course, that one is necessary, but that depends on your financial status as well.
I feel like the primary problem, or I guess the obvious problem that medicine is trying to tackle is relieving pain and suffering, not just physically but also emotional pain. But I think another problem that can be tackled is the lack of education. I think if you're able to promote knowledge to the general population, you can, I don't know, that can lead to
yes.
the prevention of disease.
You are talking about two things. You first mentioned that about illness. The second one, you've talked about well-being. At the moment, the medical field focuses almost entirely, if not, mostly, if not entirely, on illness, not so much on well-being. So it is a huge area. And I'd like to come back to your point with tradition and religion, because in Dhammasami at our Buddhist University, we invite College of Psychiatry from the UK to do workshop. We started last year, whenever they visit the country, to train GPs on mental health. This year they're coming in February for a 2-day workshop in Dhammasami at our place. I talked with them, and they, of course, interview some GP and some Buddhists. This is due to your past karma, that sort of thing. It's attributed to that. I tell them that I told those trainers from the Royal College of Psychiatry, actually, the Buddhist belief is based on the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths says, there is problem, and this problem can be solved by human compassion and wisdom. That's the whole point of Four Noble Truths. That is why we don't have God we don't have the need to have a creator, because we believe whatever problem is all human created, and they can be solved by human. But the uneducated, shall I say, in a little bit more less sympathetic way, the uneducated folk, they pick up popular belief. And if someone has mental problem, that's due to his past action, whatever. The reason that people go that way is because of lack of compassion. So later, I will be asking you to kind of skim through books. Each one book. I have got a lot of books today. I have one specific book for you. It's called Compassion Focus Therapy. Thank you. I think we move to the next table. Okay.
So I'm doing like engineering. So in terms of like engineering, like we build like.
Civil engineer. This is construction.
I'm more focused on like structural engineering, civil engineering. So like, so I've thought about like engineers being like socially and like environmentally responsible.
Mm.
So like in terms of like building, like when you do like construction, like gotta be more like careful like when dumping waste and all that. Yeah, too.
And in terms of the technology that we have in this country, we still have a lot to catch up.
It's true.
And very often, I have spoken at the Engineering Council and also the Engineering Association. So, okay, we need more compassion. Compassion means, okay, you're more interested in problems. And let's talk about drainage problem in Yangon, for example. No one has ever taken this problem seriously. If anyone ever can come up with a solution, you're going to become a billionaire straight away because everybody needs it. And it's good for you too, it's good for the whole country as well.
So I study physics and it's a natural science. So in physics, I focus on many areas such as programming, mathematics, and chemistry. So yeah. Directly though, I do not think it will have much contribution to our country, but indirectly, the skills that I learned from physics, such as computation, will lead to invention of software and application, which is very useful in terms of technology, and as well as mathematical skills, which is useful in terms of stocks and companies, finance and accounting. And so by studying this subject, it's really diverse, so I can contribute to many areas.
Anything related to physics, the skill of physics, we have to import, we have to rely on the country that economically is draining. We have not been able to do a lot out in this country. Like in Bangkok, a lot of companies, they open their branch and plant over there. They even produce chips, it's computer chip and all those things. So I think if you think about the whole country in terms of the knowledge of physics, we still need to catch up a lot. And if you can use this as your motivation, that would be very good.
I study Japanese, and I've learned teamwork. I've learned teamwork, and I did many presentations. I'm happy.
Japan being one of the most important countries in the world economically and diplomatically, to be able to tap into the resources that it has, that Japan has, that would be very good for this country.
As I'm majoring in business management, and business management itself is kind of like analyzing something and planning to accomplish a task. So I think that is the basics of everyone, because our mind itself is kind of a business. We need to analyze ourselves and plan to accomplish something. In doing so, we need to study something, learn new things to analyze ourselves again. So I think what I'm facing nowadays, I see that our society is becoming more toxic because the lack of compassion, and I would say they need to be more educated. And by means of educated, how to say, it doesn't mean like you need to get a degree from abroad or anything, but critical thinking. So what I'm seeing, like the hate speech talking in these social medias, and seeing everything in negative ways, and that is like very stressful and like making a toxic environment for everyone. And as my friends mentioned before, to accomplish everything they said, the basic of everything is we need to develop our thoughts and our ideas.
Yeah, I agree. I have just read an article in Burmese for the New Year. I say, so long you keep cursing the old year, the New Year will never come. It's all about EQ level, emotional quotient. Yeah.
As with Buddhism, I think Buddhism itself is a philosophy and very good concept, what Buddha has mentioned. But I think we Buddhisms are like misusing it and like taking it the wrong way.
In a nationalist way.
Yes, and that is we are being very superstitious. Actually, like it's become more like a tradition instead of a religious. That thing becomes like a normal thing in our society, which is creating a bad one. So
very good. You point out very good problem.
Yes, thank you. So I think we are Buddhism not because we accept it, but because of the influence of our environment. So I think as we a part of it, we should educate people more to be accepted something just because they really accept it, not because someone pushed them to. So in that case, we will have more like we will defend our willingness to do something, our desire and our beliefs.
Yeah.
So, and we don't need to like fight for other religions conflicts like happening in the Rakhine state. Instead of defending like that, we need to. The best way to defend it is like educate people more.
Yeah.
Yes, so I want to do like community development by acknowledging that.
Yeah, thank you.
That's all I want to say.
Thank you.
So I'm planning to study business management, and then the major in general, I believe that faces problems where business is has constant conflicts with ethics and sustainable practices, and sometimes even politics. Because if the country's politics is not generally aware of, then the citizens' business plans might also not be optimized. And then but then he is also planning to study economics, commerce, and then economics is more of on a national scale, so it's closely tied
macro, you mean?
Yes, macro. Yes, and then it's also closely tied to other issues such as healthcare and educational systems. So if the country's economy is rising, I would say, then the other problems such as healthcare and education systems could also be improved. So they will be directly correlated.
So she was mentioning about how economics play a major role in a country's development. I also believe that social welfare plays a part in a country's development, but at the same time, after studying economics, I believe that government do play a major role. Yeah. So if we talk about the tax system, I don't know how that works properly in Myanmar. I believe that by judging how developed Yangon is compared to about 10 years ago, I think it is well on compared to the past. So if we actually try to, say, collect more tax to fund in better education or healthcare, I guess, we'll be better off in the future.
Yeah. I don't have the statistic, but I learned from some people that the tax system is improving in the last 1 or 2 years.
I don't know what I'm studying yet. Currently, I'm still undecided. So I decided to talk about a problem that I saw from personal experience, which is healthcare in Myanmar. One thing that I noticed because of visits to hospitals for checkups for family, I realized that there was no real
protocol for the Burmese healthcare system, no standardization, which is a problem, right? Because doctors kind of have their own set of systems that they're working on, but there's no there's no wide standardized set of rules that all healthcare facilitators follow in Myanmar, and that kind of leads to like turmoil in our healthcare system. And so one way of tackling that would be, I guess, comparing to other nations, would be the standardization of our healthcare system. And when I think about that, it is a good thing. It's a good starting point, but that also brings about the problems of compassion, right? Compassion tends to be lost when people become less passionate about their working, and when their work becomes more automated than passionate. So, yeah, like that balance between standardization and compassion is what I see in the healthcare system.
A big picture, from what I know, just to add into what you just said, is that the Medical Council is still trying to catch up with the World Medical Council in terms of ethical codes. If I say this, it captures the whole problem that you mentioned. The same with the Engineering Council. The president gave me course of ethics for engineers, and a lot of engineers still don't buy into this concept of ethics. In the UK, a doctor wouldn't be allowed to operate a pharmacy. It wouldn't be allowed to sell this. It happens regularly here. If I'm a doctor, I only recommend you to buy from my shop.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there such a thing as too much compassion?
People talk about compassion fatigue. I don't think they practice compassion in terms of psychology. They go by their passion. And what I have studied from those people who have burnt out from compassion is that they have enemy who don't agree with their cause, with their passion, the passion they go for. In that way, sometimes you operate in psychology what they call threat focus. With threat focus, with that you always increase your amygdala activity, and that will lead to burnout. The other side.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Sydney. This is Catherine, Winora, and Sadrina. Regarding to our majors of studies, I plan to study in international business, focusing on trading and taxation. The young lady beside me plans to study on economics, and these two young ladies are still, however, undecided, but plans to pursue the path of medicine. So I would like to start off by scoping out our history of Myanmar on how we lack compassion within our government sectors due to our government regimen in the course of our history. This caused a downturn in our economy, and this led to a bad image and a bad image within other countries as well. Regarding to my topic on international business, I see that there are lacks of exports. There are lacks of exports, and they are more favorable on imports, which led to our economic downturn. That is why we have fairly less growth in GDP, and lots of people, lots of citizens in our country suffer a lot. That links up to our medical care, which means that there are lesser people not affordable enough to have affordable care. However, that's not only the other case. Compassion also plays with the medical role, where lots of doctors have not much compassion rather than only for their thrive for salary. That helps plays a role that it lacks in our economic activities. And there also says that in this current events, there's also sanctions lots of sanctions from other countries that makes lots of trade wars very impossible for our country, making it less likely for us to achieve global currency. That's why we have a very downturn, because of lacking compassion in the course of history. So the problem is that I think if we in the new generation could change our course of thoughts and our views on how we want to pursue in the future, we should be, like mentioned in the presentation, we should be more compassionate on each other. We should be much less selfish compared to how we have gone through before. We should pretty much work equally among, and then try to be much more innovative compared to how we were before. Because let's say even in close by there's an insurance company that does not work well, which is something that's lacking in our country. Taxation is lacking in our country. It's improving. However, this is something that should have been done before for our economic growth. However, due to the government, we're lesser educated, and due to that, we don't know that these are the good things that we should do. So that's something that I would say.
You mentioned, the history of how we are now. Often people talk about this and they feel depressed. The point of compassion is that to talk about that and to become motivated. That's the point. Instead of talking about that and giving it up and running away from the problem. The point of compassion is to train our mind to actually think about problem, face it head on, and start thinking about how we can do better. It's an opportunity. It's an opportunity.
My name is May, this is Sue, and this is Tim. I'm still in high school, but I plan to major in hospitality and tourism management. And the problems I see in this sector isn't over-tourism, but rather irresponsible travel. And what I mean by that is when tourists they travel to another country, they forget about ocean conservation and wildlife protection. And to add to that, there's, when it's not over-tourism, but when people travel irresponsibly, natural habitats and wildlife are threatened. There's damage to landscape and historical sites. Local goods become more expensive because tourists will pay more. There's price wars between hotels and between hotels firms, and so and I think that the world should promote responsible travel, and I strongly think there's a difference between over-tourism and irresponsible travelers.
So I'm studying computer engineering and electrical engineering. So one thing that I realized from what I learned in the country is, so I've taken some classes regarding power consumption and power delivery, and I thought about how Burma used to have a lot of issues regarding electricity and power outages. So I thought about how improving that could make the country develop a lot faster. So in the past, in the past 5 years, the country has developed a lot more significantly than it has before that, because of how there are no more issues of power outages as much as it has before. So, but still there are a lot of regions in the country that has issues regarding electricity. So if we could improve that, then the country as a whole could improve significantly.
My name is Sue. I'm still in high school, and I plan on majoring in business, but since everyone is talking about it, let's talk about something else that I might be majoring in, which is environmental science. I feel like that's a very important issue, and by majoring in that, I will gain a more
Just by chance, can you pass the microphone? Just by chance, yesterday on the plane, I met with the Indian ambassador here, and her daughter is doing economics as a PhD in economics in Oxford. And look, what she is focusing on is environment and economics. That's the impact, vice versa, between economics and environment. Okay, yeah, you have 2 microphones.
My name is Gao. I'm studying business, but we were talking about like the lack of resources that Myanmar has, and not only just in the medical sector, but also in pro-social places. Like we see a lot of people playing on the streets, like kids, and that we believe that like they should have like more parks, but like the lack of playgrounds and such might help development of kids. And we were talking about how like the other time we went to this park and there were like 200 people in like a park in this big, as big as this room, and they were everywhere. And we talked about that mainly how the people need to have like a pro-social activities rather than just wasting time around and playing on the streets. And we just talked about that and other things that other people have covered already.
You use the word pro-social. Actually, one of the books from there is Oxford Handbook of Compassion Science. It uses where it says compassion promotes pro-sociality. You mentioned lack of public space in Yangon. I think recently there is a survey listing Yangon as one of the worst for that. Yeah, okay.
Oh, hi, my name is IKM, and I'm also majoring in business. So we also talked about how like Myanmar has a lot of trash all around the city, and while in school, I learned that trash is never actually trash. You can actually always salvage like a lot of things from there, and you can actually use them as materials, and it's actually, trash is actually money too. So I think that instead of having so many things thrown away, I think it's better used to use it in something like important.
This year, one monastery from Bangkok, they brought some rope to offer to the Buddhist University in Taiji. And they said 16 bottles and some fabric, they can turn it into one piece of rope. Actually, the rope, that color of rope that they make is from recycling.
Hi, I'm William. I'm majoring in information management. It's a combination of both business and IT. And the problem I see the most, at least for Burma, is there's a lack of high-skilled labor, especially in the IT department. And to address the issue, our government, our universities, they're trying to implement programs for students that last 1 or 2 years, and that's simply not enough. You don't learn you don't have an adequate understanding of both IT, and you don't learn enough languages. And also considering that the teachers aren't that skilled in profession as well, we can't compete with other modern attorneys at all. So I think we need to do a better job at integrating IT into our education system, because also other more modern economies have done it since high school. We simply haven't adjusted even towards more backwards nations. I think that's also due to a lack of compassion, because we're too integrated because we take pride in our work. Because a lot of parents and stuff, especially in government schools, are really proud that their sons and daughters they do well in high school and they pass their exams, but it's really hard for them. In the modern job market, you you don't learn that enough skills. You don't learn the skills you need to compete.
It's very good that you have identified the problem rightly and use that to motivate yourself, to motivate yourself. That's really.
Hi, my name is Albert, and I'm studying cognitive science. This is William. We're studying management science. Victor's still in high school. He's a junior, and he's looking to major in architecture. Kiefer's doing political economy, and with a minor in data science. So what we discussed about here, I'll talk about for myself first. So cognitive science is a field that's psychology, but more a technical expertise on it. So basically, it's more like experimental psychology. So one of the problems I see in our country that we can address is like the understanding between individuals and the relationship we form with one another. And psychology, cognitive science, the major I'm studying, relates psychology with data. So by looking at data behind backing up the understanding of human behavior, we can look to help different aspects of the Burmese life here. That relates to everyone's major and fields.
You can even change their behavior, good behavior.
So compassion plays a big role in this, since the relationships we form with one another and the understanding between individuals can gratefully transform people and the country as well.
My name is William, and I study management science. It can be seen kind of as like similar to economics. So we just analyze which resources we allocate where, and then the most common thing we see among third world countries such as Myanmar is that we produce more towards raw materials, goods such as agricultural farming rather than manufacturing the goods. It is seen that when we just manufacture the base goods, we rely solely on the income of that instead of just innovating in order to make it more efficient, such as innovating towards tractors or better resources in order to reduce the labor that it requires. So I believe that that's how we could move forward.
Hi, my name is Victor. Albert mentioned that I want to do architecture, but something else I also want to do is urban planning. Our city needs expansion, as we can all see, because there's lots of people in the poverty line that doesn't have housing. So that's something I want to tackle when I go to university. And also, like Carl mentioned, we need lots of public spaces for mental health of people. That's something I wanted to do.
My name is Kiefer. I'm studying political economy, and I'm studying concentration in economic development. I think there's a lot of ways to address that or make use of that, but a lot of it just goes back to my being raised here. I don't know. I think for me, that's what makes me compassionate. That's what I'm passionate about too. I'm also minoring in data science, but it's not something I'm passionate about. I do it because I don't know if political economy is a demanded enough a job market or a sector. I think it tries to address a lot of problems here, and there's a lot of ways to look at it. We can look at poverty, the lack of. I think a lot of people here did cover it: healthcare, education. If we look at, for example, when countries are being measured on how developed they are, there's this thing called a human poverty index, a human development index. All these things, some incorporate how many years people are educated, the expected lifespan for each person. There's a lot of ways to address it. but at the same time, there's no one solution. I feel like every single person who has something to say that's specific to them and their major, I think everyone plays a part in doing that and fixing that problem. When you talk about people being, so for example, the HDI, the Human Development Index, looks at, like I said, like body mass for health, how many years of school you're expected to go to, and how much income you have, right? And so there's going to be a certain number of people, a percentage who's below the poverty, the minimum wage baseline. And then there's going to be the measure of saying the top 5% holds X percent of the income, whether that be 30%, 40%, 50%. And so people say, if you want to solve this, you go to foreign aid. But given the political instability, not everyone wants to provide that. And when we talk about food aid in places of like warfare like Rakhine, it's also not that simple, because a lot of people tend to say that food aid tends to instigate more conflict because there's a competition for it. And then there's the problem of income. So like I think he said it, what's your name, I'm sorry? Right, so he mentioned taxation as a way to solve it, and that's definitely one of them. And then people say like there's a lack of credit, so people are not able to be evaluated or measured on how much they're able to afford something. And that's a lot of problems, but at the same time, like I think we're taking step by step going towards the right direction. I think banks, for example, people don't love it because they're scared of like, institutions. There's a high lending credit, there's a high lending rate, high borrowing rate. So people say like microfinance institutions, which also is a great idea in concept and theory, but it's not always as efficient as people want it to be. So like my point is, there's a lot to fix, but I think it just goes like step by step, and that it takes compassion for people to play their part in doing that.
Okay. I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased with what we have discussed and the exercise that we have done. Meaning that okay, now we have identified the right program in related areas. The question is okay, when we actually get into that, and when we come up against challenges, persistent difficulties, how much we can keep going. So with this, I'd like to show you one more video clip. This is from California. Reimagining compassion as power, not as a substitute or supplement, when other measures have failed, but to start with it. So this is reimagining compassion.
Okay, true story. 8 friends gathered around a backyard dinner party in Washington, D.C. They're celebrating a restaurant one of them had just opened. It was about 10 p.m. There's a fellow there named Michael. He had his wife and daughter, and he was talking to his wife when he noticed a hand and the barrel of a gun come between them. A man of medium build in a clean sweatsuit stepped up and pointed the gun at his daughter, and then pointed the gun at his wife, and looked Michael in the face and said, "Give me your money or I'm going to start effing shooting." And it was an odd coincidence that no one at the party had any money. So they started casting around, trying to figure out what they were going to do to dissuade this man, and the first thing that they came on was guilt. What would your mother think of you? Didn't work. I haven't got any effing mother. So now it's tense. And Michael's looking around and he's saying, someone's going to get hurt, maybe everybody. At which point, a woman named Christina stepped up and tried a different tack. "Hey, we're all celebrating," she said. "Why don't you sit down and share a glass of wine?"
Michael said it was like a switch flipped. You could feel it. The man took the glass of wine. Damn, that's a good glass of wine. Michael offered him the bottle. He put his gun in his pocket, reached for some cheese. He said, "Hey, could I have a hug?" Christina hugged him. Mike's wife hugged him. How about a group hug? They all huddled around him, gave him a hug, and when they let him go, he said, "I'm sorry," and walked out with his glass of wine. So what happened there? Michael says he knows what happens. It was a miracle, and you can see why he would think that, but I want to propose something different happened. I want to propose that was compassion done powerfully. And by compassion, I don't mean the casual phrases that we throw off. I don't mean, "I feel terrible for you," "I can't imagine how you feel," or "I know just how you feel." I don't mean that. I mean finding and meeting fundamental needs. And by fundamental human needs, I don't mean a glass of wine, a chunk of cheese, and a stack of cash. I mean those universal things that we feel we've got to have to survive as tribal animals. So I mean, sure, safety and security, but also affection, connection, being seen and heard, belonging. So we don't know what the gunman needed that night. We may never know. Whatever it was, Christina may have stumbled on it by accident or by instinct. But he wanted it more than money. And it was strong enough to deflect a bullet and maybe save a life and maybe more. So the question to us becomes, wouldn't it be great if we could marshal that and create those results in critical situations and it wasn't a miracle? Wouldn't it be great if we were adept at handling human interactions so that we could keep conflict from escalating, or so that we could sidestep it altogether? And in my experience, we can. And what that takes is reimagining compassion. Not as kind of simple warmth or kindness, but instead a set of concrete practices that you can use when you don't want to get into a test of wills, that you can use when you're afraid that force will fail or escalate or backfire. Pretty simple set of practices. So listen for a call for help, share empathy, and share options. How would that look? Well, here's an example that comes from work that I've done in healthcare. Comes up pretty often. How do you cope with a patient or a family member who's really upset? This comes from work that I did in a youth mental health clinic in a really, really difficult part of town. So there's a woman in the lobby, and she's a patient's mother, and she's screaming and yelling and stomping. She's yelling at her kids. "You better get the hell over here. You better sit your butt down. You better listen to your mother." And she's yelling at the receptionist. "You better get me in to see my damn doctor." They send out a security guard. He says, "Ma'am, you can't talk that way." She ignores him. The lobby's electric. So put yourself in that situation. What are you going to do? If you're like most people, you're going to try to get her to calm down. And that's what David tried. He was the therapist who had to go out and deal with her. He said, "Ma'am, I need you to calm down." You're right. You're right. Didn't work. Failed utterly. So what we want to get clear on is why it failed. And the reason that it failed is that he was dealing at the level of actions, not at the level of deep-seated needs that we've been talking about. So imagine a bullseye that has needs at its center and actions at the periphery. Here's the problem. This woman comes in, and you can tell she's got some really deep-seated needs, yes? So she tries to come up with an action plan that will meet those needs. And when she comes up with one, she gets attached to it. Becomes if only I can carry out these actions, I'll get these needs met. And so those actions stand in place of those needs. So when David walks up and says, "You can't do those actions," he becomes an enemy that's coming between her and what she needs. And two things happen. He becomes an enemy, someone standing between her and her needs, and she escalates. So she won't listen to him, and she escalates. So what's the alternative? The alternative is to go through that process that we talked about. Listen for a call for help. And that means thinking about that dynamic that we talked about before and bypassing actions and going to needs. So looking at that woman and saying, she is not an opponent that I need to stop. She is a person with needs that she needs badly, and she's afraid she's going to fail. And that flips a switch in me, and I begin to get more open. Then I can exchange empathy with her. So essentially that means going to this person that I used to see as an opponent and saying, what do you need? And you can use emotions as a guide. So if I'm getting my needs met, I'm some kind of happy. If I'm not getting my needs met, I'm some kind of suffering. I'm in pain or I'm angry. So David steps up to this woman and says, you seem really upset. That's the emotion. Do you need attention? That's the need. She didn't thank him, right? Because that's the point she's been trying to get across for 30 minutes. But if he can keep that up, if he can keep up acknowledging her needs and acknowledging her feelings, she'll experience that as empathy. A switch will begin to flip in her, and she'll begin to open up. And what David found out when that happened was that there was a lot of fear behind this woman's anger. Her eldest son had just been thrown out of his third daycare for aggression, essentially for bullying. And she didn't see how she was going to get him care and put food on the table, so she was near tears. Now that David understands that, he's faced with a whole different problem than he thought he was. So now he can begin to share options with her. What looked at first like it was a demand for her to get in to see her doctor now shows up as something that can be solved a whole variety of ways. We can call your daycare center and explain to them what's going on. We can get a referral to another agency. We can call your neighbors and see if we can enlist them. And there are other options. So there are a whole variety of options, and that's important because what we're driving with this form of compassion is collaboration. It's not domination. It's not intimidation. It's not submission. And it's not compromise. This isn't yell quieter. This is a new set of options that didn't seem to be on the table before we could talk to each other. And that model that I've just laid out to you works really well one-on-one, and it works across domains. So it works all throughout healthcare, but we've also discovered that it works with parents who want cooperation from their kids, or mothers who want a better experience of life with her mother, or an executive who's got a corporate initiative and is trying to get cooperation from another executive who doesn't owe it to him. So it transfers across domains. But you might ask yourself, okay, good. It works with friends and family, it works with colleagues, it works with customers. That's nice. What about people who hate you? What about your enemies? And it's great that it works one-on-one, but we have systemic issues. What about systems? Does it work on a system-wide basis? And Connie Rice might have been asking herself those kinds of questions a few years ago. Connie Rice is a civil rights attorney and activist in LA. And her lawsuits have brought in better than $10 billion in damages as she's tried to protect and fight for communities like the Watts neighborhood in LA. You may be familiar with the Watts neighborhood. It's got a tough history. That's a place that people described as a cross between a tenement and a dilapidated army barracks. In 1965, you might remember the riots ended up in 34 deaths and $40 million in property damage. And when you're talking about property damage as a result of riots in your neighborhood, you're talking about rocks and bullets and broken glass and fire. Riots again following Rodney King's arrest in 1991, this time 55 deaths and $1 billion in damages. That's a tough neighborhood. In the 80s and 90s, there were so many homicides in this neighborhood that parents took to having their kids sleep in the bathtub. And the police responded with paramilitary campaigns. You may remember Cops in Riot Gear. Campaigns that went by names such as Crash or Operation Hammer. And as a result of those campaigns and the Rodney King incident, Connie Rice went to war. In her words, went to war with the LA Police Department and began to launch lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit and was successful until she stopped. And you might wonder why she stopped after 20 years. And the reason was, she looked at that neighborhood and said, this will never be enough. These lawsuits will never end. You cannot legislate behavior change. This community I'm trying to protect is segregating and, in her words, turning into a killing zone. So what do? She said, this problem will be solved with empathy and compassion. Over the course of 18 months, she interviewed 900 police officers. Think of what an act of courage that is. To go into the heart of a group that you've been fighting for 20 years and ask, what do you need? And what she heard was fear beneath the brutality. Time and time again. Ms. Rice, I'm terrified of black men. Ms. Rice, you know, those black men, they come out of prison, they have that great Hulk strength. I'm afraid they're going to kill me. Can you teach me how not to be afraid of black men? How tough is that to hear from a group of people who've pulled over your neighbors, pulled them out of their cars, thrown them on the ground, and searched them with no provocation? And her response to that was not labeling them, but saying, to me and my community, that sounds like racism. To you, it doesn't. It's a true expression of fear. And any solution that we're going to come up with that's going to work has got to work for my community, and it's got to work for you as well. So we need to work together. There's a model of courage. So they came up with a new model of policing. They brought together the community, civil rights advocates, the police force, and they came up with a four-pronged model of policing. Police hanging out in the neighborhoods, tutoring kids, setting up sports teams, and even setting up health screenings. And you got to ask yourself, come on, this is a gang-torn neighborhood. This is a neighborhood with a paramilitary presence in it. And you're gonna form study groups and health screenings. How did that work? In Nickerson Gardens, where it was piloted, 66% drop in property crime, 90% drop in physical crime. That means people getting hurt. The Watts neighborhood is still torn by struggle between police and the residents, but overall, 70% drop in homicides. Been very effective. It's held up as a model around the country. And that model that we talked about, that model of interacting, of showing compassion and empathy, works system-wide in other areas as well. It works when, for example, you're trying to reduce recidivism among prison inmates, and it's been shown to be effective at fighting bullying in school districts where zero-tolerance policies fail. So it generalizes. What's the takeaway? Compassion is power. Compassion is not what you fall back on when force fails. Compassion, if done deliberately, can turn enemies into allies. And when that happens, you're solving different problems that you started with. And you're facing solutions that weren't on the table and weren't in your imagination when you started. Compassion is power. So what does that mean to you? I don't know what part of the world you're trying to change, or what change you may feel being thrust upon you right now. But wouldn't it be great to be powerful? Wouldn't it be great if you could create results like that at critical times and it wasn't a miracle? And you can. You can win and other people don't have to lose. You can create change and you don't have to force people. And the process can be healing. So how do you start? Next time you're toe-to-toe with somebody, whether that's face-to-face or whether that's over Twitter or over Facebook or whatever social media you have, next time you're face-to-face with someone who opposes you, who threatens you, who annoys you, who angers you, who you see as an enemy, consider that the 4 most powerful words that you can use may not be "this will not stand." It might be, "what do you need?" Thank you.
I think the message is clear. I don't think we need to repeat. As the last activity, I don't think we will have time to share, but I still want you to have a look at this book. Can you come and take these books and share? And if you like, okay, take some notes of these books. Just come each table. Yeah. You can exchange books. More books here, the other table. We have more than enough. I think 27 of you, and this is a very big book. We can spend out 5-6 minutes, 7 minutes just getting to know these resources. Yeah. You can take note of those resources. Anyone is looking at this now. Anyone interested in neurology? Do you have one extra book there? Okay. This is about history. If the best way is if you can get something out of this, some idea, from this, and then share with each other over your dinner, over your supper. That would be a good idea. We wouldn't have a lot of time to go around and everybody sharing what they have. Do you mind if I take this away? That's neurology, that one, neurology and psychology. This is psychology from Harvard. Professor David is from Harvard. There's a huge one. There's compassion science from Oxford. Yeah. A lot of medics and other people. So many articles. I think we will wrap up in 1 or 2 minutes time. This is just to introduce to you that these resources are available to you, and they are related to how scientists in the West study Buddhism. So how they study Buddhism. So, it will be different from what we have seen from our parents, grandparents. And this is a more practical way of helping people, not just individually, but also system-wise. this book, what you're reading here, Siddhartha's brain, this Prince Siddhartha is the Buddha, sorry. This is Prince Siddhartha who would become the Buddha. People study his brain, and basically it tells us about life of the Buddha, but from a neurological point of view, how his brain would be developed with the practice that he was doing. This is the more interesting story of the Buddha. Wendy, I told you about the conference that I organized at Yangon University. I asked if any of you would like to volunteer to help, and these are the leaflet. If you can go through. Yangon University is celebrating its centenary. It's 100 years old. I was worried that they wouldn't have any elements of Buddhist studies. So I asked the government to allow me to organize this. And the government has been very kind and understanding. So I organized this. We are going to have 6 lectures. Some are on history, some are on Buddhist philosophy. You can see the title. You can see the speaker, the first one. He studied both Western philosophy and Buddhist philosophy. So he's going to talk about comparison. And I'm going to be speaking from my PhD thesis from Oxford, that's education and history. The fourth one, he studied at Cambridge for his MPhil, and he's an anthropologist of Buddhism and anthropology. The next one, a Spanish guy, actually he specializes in Bali and Bali composing Myanmar. And he did his PhD at Cambridge on this subject. And the young lady, she did economics and business management at Oxford and then PhD in London, switching from business study to Buddhist studies. And she's going to be talking about history of Abhidhamma, what is Buddhist psychology. Study at University of Yangon and that impact worldwide. Actually, we used to be very good. People had to refer to our work here in the 30s and 40s and 50s. At that time, the people abroad, they had to rely on our work because the research was so good at that time. And the last person, a French, he studied at London University. He is an expert in Burmese history, especially Mindo era. So, if you can help as a volunteer to welcome guests, we will have some embassy coming. We have some rectors and deputy rectors from other universities, from other universities coming. Academics coming, and the congregation hall holds about 1,200 people. Well, that's why we need a lot of volunteers. So if you are still in the country, those who are at uni, overseas, if you are still in the country, if you wish to volunteer, you can contact Wendy. And we brief you what you will have to do. My team will one day contact you and brief mainly is about taking care of the guests and maybe is helping the speaker to run the session, like what we organize in the hotel, semi-pub view, that sort of thing. It wouldn't be, it's a big task, but we need a lot of English speaking volunteers. You can see four of the 6 speakers are foreigners. So with this, I think we can conclude this evening. You might be hungry as well. So if you can collect all the books and put them into a suitcase. I have a suitcase over there. And you can have more of this. I have more of this. And if you have extra, just pass this to other people. Maybe Jolan, BB. You can leave them that the month we take care of them. Some of them you need to put them into bags first. We have bags, so it's okay. Just leave them back the month we. Tell me, you can just leave them here. BB, tell me, BB.
ပြီးလို့ရှိရင်လေပုံပုံနဲ့ group photo လေးရိုက်အောင်မှတ်ပြရတယ်နော်
ဟိုနဲ့ပြန်မီးနဲ့လေးထပ်ပြီးတော့ဖွင့်ပေးအောင်